The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. I was barely awake, stumbling toward the coffee maker in my small Denver apartment when the shrill ring cut through the silence. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Miss Jasmine Rodriguez? This is Patricia Hawkins from Hawkins & Associates Estate Planning. I'm calling regarding your father's estate settlement. My father had passed away 3 months earlier. Robert Rodriguez, 67, sudden heart attack while working in his garage. The funeral was small, quiet. My sister Madison and I had barely spoken during the service. We'd grown apart over the years, especially after she married her wealthy husband and moved to the suburbs of Phoenix. I'm sorry to bother you so early, Patricia continued, but we've encountered some irregularities with the inheritance distribution. Could you come to our office today? It's quite urgent. My stomach dropped. Irregularities? Dad's will was straightforward. He'd told me himself during one of our last conversations. Madison would get the house in Tucson, and I would receive his life insurance payout and savings account. Split down the middle, fair and square. What kind of irregularities? I asked, now fully awake. I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you be here by 10 a.m.? The drive to the law office felt endless. Phoenix traffic crawled under the blazing Arizona sun, and my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe there was a mistake in the paperwork. Maybe Dad had forgotten to update something. Maybe the insurance company was being difficult. I parked outside the modest brick building and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and I wore my best interview outfit. A navy blazer I'd bought at a thrift store, and black slacks that had seen better days. Teaching kindergarten in an underfunded district didn't exactly pay for designer clothes. Patricia Hawkins was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind eyes that couldn't quite hide her concern. She led me to a conference room with a mahogany table and offered me coffee, which I declined. My hands were already shaking enough. Jasmine, I need to ask you some questions about your father's final months. Did he seem confused? Forgetful? Different in any way? I shook my head. No, he was sharp as ever. Why? She opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. According to these records, your father visited our office 6 times in the last 2 months of his life. Each time, he made significant changes to his will and beneficiary designations. My heart started pounding. What kind of changes? The final version, dated just 2 weeks before his death, leaves everything to Madison Rodriguez Sullivan. The house, the life insurance, the savings account, even his pension fund. Everything. The room spun slightly. That's impossible. Dad told me specifically that we were splitting everything equally. He said he wanted to make sure I was taken care of because Madison was already financially secure. Patricia's expression grew more troubled. There's more. The life insurance beneficiary was changed online using your father's account. The savings account was transferred to a joint account with Madison's name on it. And this. She slid another document across the table. This is a receipt for a wire transfer of $480,000 from your father's investment account to Madison's personal account. It was processed the day before he died. My vision blurred. $500,000. Gone. To my sister, who lived in a mansion, drove a BMW, and posted Instagram photos of her luxury vacations every month. I need to see my father's signature on these documents, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia handed me the will. The signature looked like Dad's, but something was off. The R in Rodriguez was too sharp, too deliberate. Dad had arthritis in his hands. His signature had become looser, more flowing over the years. This looked practiced. Have you been in contact with Madison about this? I asked. We've tried calling her multiple times. She hasn't returned our calls, which is unusual, considering she's now the sole beneficiary of a substantial estate. I stared at the documents spread across the table. My father had worked double shifts at the copper mine for 30 years. He'd saved every penny, denied himself vacations, drove the same pickup truck for 15 years. Also, his daughters would have something when he was gone. What are my options? I asked. We can contest the will. but it will require proving that your father was either incompetent or that fraud was involved. Do you have any evidence that Madison might have? Forged his signature? Manipulated him? Stolen from him? I finished her sentence. I don't know, but I'm gonna find out. I left the law office with copies of everything, and a phone number for a forensic handwriting expert. The drive home was a blur of rage and disbelief. Madison had always been the golden child, the one who got everything handed to her. Perfect grades, perfect husband, perfect house. But this was different. This was stealing from our dead father. Back in my apartment, I spread the documents across my small dining table. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Carla. How did the lawyer meeting go? I couldn't even type a response. Instead, I called her. Carla, I need you to come over. Bring wine. A lot of wine. What happened? Madison stole my inheritance. All of it. $500,000. Silence. Then, I'll be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened Madison's Instagram account. There she was, smiling in her perfectly decorated kitchen, holding a glass of champagne. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, but everything happens for a reason. #blessed, #new chapter, #grateful." Posted 3 days ago. 3 days later, she'd presumably learned about Dad's revised will. I scrolled through her recent posts. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, a spa weekend in Sedona. All time-stamped in the weeks after Dad's death. While I'd been grieving, eating ramen noodles, and wondering how I'd afford to replace my dying car, she'd been living it up. Carla arrived with a bottle of red wine and took one look at my face. Oh, honey, what did she do? I showed her everything. The documents, the signatures, the bank records. Carla was a paralegal. She knew enough about legal documents to understand what we were looking at. This is fraud, she said flatly. Clear, deliberate fraud. Look at these dates. Your dad supposedly changed his will 6 times in 2 months, after leaving it untouched for years? And this wire transfer the day before he died? Jasmine, this is criminal. But how do I prove it? You start by finding out what Madison knew and when she knew it. Do you have any of your dad's old paperwork? Bank statements? Phone records? I remembered Dad's bedroom, still untouched in the Tucson house. Madison had the keys now, but she'd told me I could go through his personal items anytime. Maybe she thought there was nothing incriminating there. I need to get into the house, I said. Dad kept everything. Every receipt, every statement, every piece of paper. If there's evidence of what really happened, it's there. Carla nodded. But be careful. If Madison is capable of forging legal documents and stealing from her own father, she's capable of anything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the last conversation I'd had with Dad. He'd called me on a Sunday afternoon, just 2 weeks before he died. He'd sounded tired but happy. Jasmine, Misha, I want you to know that I've taken care of everything. You won't have to worry about money when I'm gone. You work so hard, help so many kids, and you never ask for anything. Your sister, she's got her fancy life. But you're the one who calls me every week, who comes to visit, who remembers my birthday. I want to make sure you're okay. He'd never mentioned changing his will. Never hinted that he was reconsidering how to divide his assets. If anything, he'd seemed more committed than ever to making sure I was provided for. This Bodhi. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. Inheritance fraud, forged wills, elder abuse. The stories I found were horrifying. Families torn apart by greed, vulnerable elderly people manipulated by their own children, life savings stolen with a few strategic signatures. But I also found hope. Cases where justice prevailed, where the truth came out and the real perpetrators faced consequences, where the rightful beneficiaries got what was legally theirs. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Tucson. The house looked the same from the outside. A modest ranch-style home with a desert landscape front yard that Dad had meticulously maintained. But knowing that Madison now owned it, that she could sell it or rent it or do whatever she wanted with the place where I'd grown up, made my chest tight with anger. I used my key to let myself in. The house smelled like Dad's cologne and the vanilla candles he'd always kept in the living room. His coffee mug was still in the sink, unwashed. A book lay open on his favorite chair, a bookmark still marking his place. In his bedroom, I found what I was looking for. File cabinets full of financial records, medical documents, correspondence. Dad had been methodical about everything, dating back decades. If Madison had manipulated him, if she'd been planning this, there would be a trail. I started with the most recent files. Bank statements from the last 6 months showed regular deposits from his pension and Social Security. Nothing unusual until the final month, when there were several large withdrawals, cash withdrawals that didn't match Dad's usual careful spending habits. Then I found the phone records. In the 2 months before his death, there were dozens of calls to Madison's number. Long calls, some lasting over an hour. This was strange because Dad and Madison rarely talked on the phone. Their relationship had been cordial but distant since her marriage. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But it was the medical records that really caught my attention. Dad's doctor had noted concerns about, quote, increased anxiety and family stress in his final visits. There were prescriptions for sleep aids and anti-anxiety medication. Dad had never taken anything stronger than aspirin in his life. I photographed everything with my phone, careful to document the dates and details. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A handwritten note in Dad's shaky handwriting. Madison says Jasmine doesn't need the money, says she's young and can earn her own way. Maybe she's right. Maybe I should leave everything to Madison's children instead. Below that, in different ink, was another note. Madison visited again today, very upset about Jasmine's spending. Says she saw her buying expensive clothes and going out to fancy restaurants. I'm worried about her judgment with money. I stared at the note, my hands trembling. Expensive clothes? Fancy restaurants? I shopped at thrift stores and cooked dinner at home 6 nights a week. Madison had been lying to our father about me, poisoning his mind against me in his final months. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stay away from the house. This is your only warning. I looked around the empty house, suddenly aware of how isolated I was. Madison lived only 20 minutes away. Had she been watching the house? Did she know I was here? I quickly gathered all the documents I'd found and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard a car pulling into the driveway. Through the window, I saw Madison's white BMW. She was here, and I was trapped inside with evidence that could destroy her. I watched through the curtains as Madison got out of her car. She was perfectly dressed as always. Designer jeans, silk blouse, expensive sunglasses. But there was something different about her posture, something tense and predatory. She had keys, of course. The house was hers now. I heard the front door open and her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Jasmine, she called out. I know you're here. Your car's in the driveway. I clutched the documents to my chest and stepped out of the bedroom. Madison was standing in the living room, her perfectly manicured hands on her hips. What are you doing here? She demanded. Going through Dad's things? Like you said I could. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed the papers in my hands. What is that? Dad's financial records, his phone bills, his medical files. Madison's face went pale beneath her makeup. You have no right to go through his private documents. I have every right. I'm his daughter too, or was, before you convinced him to cut me out of his will. The pretense dropped from Madison's face like a mask. The sweet, concerned sister act disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. You don't deserve Dad's money, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. You never visited him unless you needed something. You never called unless you wanted to complain about your job or your apartment or your pathetic life. That's not true, and you know it. I was here every week, Jasmine. Every week, taking care of him, making sure he was okay. You showed up for holidays and birthdays and acted like that was enough. You live 20 minutes away. I live in Denver. I called him every Sunday and you know it. Madison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Those 5-minute calls where you barely listened to what he was saying? Were you obviously distracted, probably scrolling through your phone? That's not caring, Jasmine. That's an obligation. I stared at my sister, this woman I'd grown up with, shared a room with, played with as a child. She was describing a version of me that didn't exist, painting our father as someone he'd never been. Madison, what did you do to him? I opened his eyes. I showed him who you really were. Selfish, immature, irresponsible. He deserved to know the truth about his precious baby daughter. What truth? That I work 60 hours a week teaching kids? That I volunteer at the shelter on weekends? That I send him pictures of my students' artwork because I know it makes him smile? That you're a failure, Madison said coldly. That you're 32 years old and living in a studio apartment, driving a car that should have been scrapped 5 years ago, working a job that barely pays minimum wage. Dad worked his whole life to build something, and you would have just wasted it all. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This wasn't about money or inheritance or even grief. This was about power. About proving that she was better, more deserving, more worthy of love. So you forged his signature, I said quietly. You manipulated a sick, grieving man and stole his life savings. Madison's expression didn't change. I didn't steal anything. I helped him make the right decision. The decision he should have made years ago. The handwriting expert is going to prove you forged those documents. What handwriting expert? I'd said too much. Madison's eyes gleamed with a predatory satisfaction. You can't prove anything, Jasmine. Dad changed his will because he realized the truth about you. He died knowing his money was going to someone who would use it responsibly. You mean someone who would use it to buy designer handbags and take vacations while their sister struggles to pay rent? I mean someone who built a life worth inheriting. Someone who married well, raised children, contributed to society. Not someone who plays with finger paints all day and calls it a career. The contempt in her voice was absolute. She genuinely believed that my life was worthless, that my work was meaningless, that I deserved nothing. Dad loved me, I said, my voice breaking slightly. He was proud of me. He told me so. Dad pitied you. There's a difference. I looked at this woman who shared my DNA, who had grown up in the same house, been raised by the same parents, and I realized that I didn't know her at all. Maybe I never had. I'm going to fight this, I said. I'm going to prove what you did. Madison smiled, a cold, perfect smile. Good luck with that, you'll need it. She turned and walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Jasmine, change your locks. I'll be having the house locks changed tomorrow. Consider this your last time here. After she left, I sat in Dad's favorite chair and cried. Not just for the money, though $480,000 would have changed my life completely. I cried for the father I'd lost twice, once to death, and once to the lies my sister had whispered in his ear. I cried for the family that had never really existed, just an illusion I'd been too naive to see through. But underneath the grief, something else was growing. Something harder and more determined. Madison thought she'd won, thought she'd outsmarted everyone, and gotten away with the perfect crime. She was wrong. Fauched. I had the documents, I had the evidence, and I had something Madison would never understand. The absolute certainty that comes from knowing you're fighting for what's right. The war for my father's legacy was just beginning, and I wasn't going to lose. The drive back to Denver felt like traveling through a time machine. Every mile marker triggered another memory of how Madison and I had become strangers wearing the masks of sisters. I pulled over at a rest stop somewhere outside Flagstaff and called Carla. She admitted it, I said without preamble. Not in so many words, but she admitted manipulating Dad. She actually said she, quote, helped him make the right decision. Jesus, Jasmine, did you record any of it? No, I was too shocked. But I have the documents. Medical records showing Dad was anxious and taking sleep medication in his final months. Phone records proving she was calling him constantly. And handwritten notes where Dad mentions Madison telling him lies about me. What kind of lies? I leaned against my car watching trucks rumble past in the desert heat, that I was irresponsible with money. That I was buying expensive clothes and eating at fancy restaurants, that I never really cared about him. Carla was quiet for a moment. You know, this explains so much about your family dynamic. I never understood why you always seemed so careful around them." She was right. I'd been walking on eggshells around Madison for years, trying to maintain some semblance of a relationship, while never quite understanding why everything felt so strained. Now I knew. Madison had been building her case against me for years, collecting grievances and twisted truths to justify what she'd planned to do. But this pattern wasn't new. It had roots that went back to our childhood, growing like poison ivy through the cracks of our family foundation. Madison was 3 years older than me, born when our parents were young and still figuring out how to be adults. By the time I came along, they'd found their footing, established routines, learned from their mistakes with their first child. Madison never forgave me for that. She used to tell people I was adopted. Not as a joke, but as a serious claim that sent me running to Mom in tears. "You don't look like us," she'd say with scientific certainty. "Your hair is different. Your eyes are different. Mom and Dad probably felt sorry for you." I was 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table crying, when Mom finally sat us both down and pulled out the photo albums. She showed us pictures of Dad as a child, the same dark hair, the same brown eyes I'd inherited. She showed us pictures of her grandmother, who had the same nose, the same stubborn chin that marked my face. "Madison, stop telling your sister she's adopted," Mom said firmly. "She's your blood, and she's staying." But the damage was done. Madison had learned that she could hurt me with words, and I'd learned that my place in the family was somehow conditional, something that needed to be defended. The pattern continued through elementary school. Madison was the star student, the one teachers remembered years later. She played violin, took dance classes, won spelling bees. When I started kindergarten, every teacher knew Madison Rodriguez's little sister was coming. "You have big shoes to fill," Mrs. Patterson told me on the first day of first grade. "Your sister was one of our best students ever." I tried to follow Madison's path, but I was different. Where she excelled at memorization and following rules, I was creative and emotional. Where she thrived in structured activities, I preferred making up games and telling stories. My report cards were good but not exceptional. My talents were less measurable, harder to display on a trophy shelf. Where she plans, Madison noticed. "Jasmine got another B," she'd announce at dinner, her voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe she needs a tutor." Dad would ruffle my hair. "B's are good grades, Mija. You're doing fine." But Madison's words carried weight. She was older, more articulate, seemingly more mature. When she suggested I was struggling, people listened. High school was worse. Madison had graduated valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to Arizona State University. The bar was set impossibly high, and every achievement of mine was measured against her legacy. I found my passion in art and education, spending hours in the art room painting and working with younger students as a tutor. But those accomplishments felt small next to Madison's business degree and her internship at a prestigious marketing firm. "It's nice that Jasmine found something she enjoys," Madison would say when relatives asked about my plans. "Not everyone is cut out for demanding careers." The subtext was clear. I was taking the easy path, lacking the intelligence or drive for real success. College was my escape. I chose a school in Colorado specifically to get away from Madison's shadow. For 4 years, I was just Jasmine. Not Madison's little sister, not the disappointing follow-up act. I thrived in my education program, discovered my love for working with young children, and built friendships based on who I was rather than who I wasn't. But family gatherings remained minefields. Madison would arrive in designer clothes with stories of promotions and bonuses. She'd met Marcus Sullivan during her senior year, a trust fund kid whose family owned construction companies across the Southwest. Their wedding was featured in Phoenix magazine, a lavish affair that showcased Madison's rise into a different social stratum. I was the maid of honor, wearing a bridesmaid dress that cost more than my monthly rent. During the reception, Madison pulled me aside for what she called a sister moment. "I'm so proud of how far you've come," she said, her voice warm and condescending. "From that shy little girl who used to cry about everything to a real teacher. It shows that with enough effort, anyone can find their place." Even my career choice became evidence of my limitations in Madison's narrative. Teaching wasn't a calling or a passion, it was settling for less than I was capable of achieving. The first major crack in our relationship came when Dad got sick 5 years ago. He'd developed pneumonia that landed him in the hospital for a week. I drove down from Denver immediately, taking time off work to be with him. Madison showed up once, stayed for 30 minutes, and spent most of that time on her phone dealing with urgent business matters. "Some of us can't just abandon our responsibilities," she said when Mom gently suggested she should visit more often. "I have deadlines, clients depending on me. Jasmine has summers off and can take sick days whenever she wants." The implication was that my job was less important, my time less valuable. Dad noticed the difference in our availability, and it meant something to him. He started calling me more often, sharing stories about his childhood, asking about my students. Madison began to resent these conversations. "Dad's getting too dependent on Jasmine," she told Mom during a family barbecue I wasn't supposed to overhear. "He calls her for every little thing instead of handling problems himself." But the real trouble started when Madison's marriage began to crumble. Marcus had always been controlling, but as his trust fund dwindled due to poor investments, he became openly abusive. Madison hid it well, maintaining her perfect social media presence while dealing with a husband who monitored her spending and criticized her appearance. She never told me directly about the problems, but I started noticing signs: makeup that didn't quite cover a bruise, expensive jewelry that suddenly disappeared, canceled plans because Marcus needed her at home. When I tried to reach out, to offer support, or just a listening ear, Madison shut me down completely. "My marriage is fine," she said coldly during a Christmas dinner. "Not everyone needs to air their personal problems to the whole family." The irony was stunning. Madison had spent years undermining my confidence and questioning my choices, but when she needed genuine support, she couldn't accept it from me. I wasn't credible enough to be trusted with her real struggles. Dad saw the changes in Madison too. He started asking me questions about her during our Sunday phone calls. "Does Madison seem different to you?" he asked about 6 months before he died. "She's so tense lately, always talking about money and stress." "Maybe she's having problems with Marcus," I suggested carefully. "That boy never was good enough for her," Dad said with surprising vehemence. "Too much money, too young, no respect for what things cost." It was one of the few times I'd heard Dad criticize Madison's choices directly. But instead of bringing us closer together, Madison's struggles seemed to make her more resentful of my stability and contentment. "It must be nice to have such a simple life," she said during Dad's birthday dinner last year. "No real pressure, no big decisions to make. Just show up and play with kids all day." I'd learned to let comments like that slide, but Dad hadn't. "Jasmine works harder than anyone I know," he said firmly. "Those kids are lucky to have her." Madison's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. That was the moment, I think, when she decided I didn't deserve Dad's love or his legacy. The final incident happened 3 weeks before Dad's death. Madison called me, crying, claiming that Marcus had emptied their joint account and disappeared. She needed money for a lawyer, for basic living expenses, for dignity. "I know we haven't always been close," she sobbed into the phone. "But you're my sister. You're the only one who can help me." I didn't have much, but I scraped together $3,000 from my emergency fund and drove to Phoenix to deliver it in person. Madison hugged me, promised she'd pay me back as soon as the divorce was finalized, swore that this crisis had made her realize what really mattered. 2 days later, I saw her Instagram post from a spa resort in Scottsdale. She was drinking champagne by a pool, wearing a new bikini, celebrating her strength and independence. The $3,000 I'd given her had paid for a luxury weekend while I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and wondered if my car would make it through another winter. When I called to confront her about it, Madison's response was breathtaking in its cruelty. "I never asked you to be my savior," she said. "If you can't afford to help your family without keeping score, maybe you shouldn't offer." But the real gut punch came next. Besides, $3,000 isn't exactly life-changing money. It's not like you sacrificed anything important. That conversation replayed in my mind as I drove through the New Mexico darkness. Madison's capacity for manipulation wasn't new. It was a refined skill she'd been developing for decades. She'd learned to identify people's weaknesses, to exploit their love and loyalty, to rewrite history in ways that always cast her as the victim or the hero. What was new was the scope of her latest con. Stealing my inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about proving, once and for all, that she was the daughter who mattered, the one who deserved everything our father had worked to build. But Madison had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd spent so many years underestimating me, dismissing my intelligence and resilience, that she'd forgotten I was Robert Rodriguez's daughter too. I had his stubborn streak, his sense of justice, his unwillingness to back down when something mattered. She thought I'd accept her theft the way I'd accepted years of subtle cruelty and manipulation. She thought I'd choose family peace over personal justice, the way I always had before. She was wrong. By the time I reached Denver, I'd made a decision that would have shocked the quiet, accommodating girl Madison remembered. I wasn't going to fade away gracefully. I wasn't going to let her rewrite our father's final wishes or steal his legacy. I was going to fight back with everything I had, and I was going to win. The war Madison had started with her forged signatures and manipulative lies was about to become very real. And this time, the quiet sister was done staying silent. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that usually made me love living in Denver. But as I sat in my car outside Lincoln Elementary watching my fellow teachers hurry through the parking lot with their coffee cups and lesson plans, I felt like I was living in someone else's life. 3 days had passed since my confrontation with Madison. 3 days of barely sleeping, of staring at the ceiling and replaying every conversation, every memory, every moment that had led to this betrayal. I'd called in sick Friday, something I'd never done, unless I was actually running a fever. "Miss Rodriguez?" Carla's voice came through my phone. "You've been sitting in the parking lot for 20 minutes. The kids are going to start wondering where you are." I looked up to see her standing by my car window, concern etched across her face. Carla worked as a paralegal for Morrison & Associates, a family law firm 3 blocks from my school. We'd met at a coffee shop 2 years ago and bonded over our shared frustration with the legal system's complexity. "I can't do this today," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. How am I supposed to teach 26 kindergartners about fairness and sharing when my own sister just stole $500,000 from our dead father? Carla opened the passenger door and slid in beside me. "Because those kids need you, and because sitting in this parking lot isn't going to get your money back." She was right, of course, but the thought of pretending everything was normal, of reading stories about honesty and kindness while my sister was probably planning her next luxury vacation with Dad's money, felt impossible. "I've been thinking about this all weekend," Carla continued. "We need to approach this systematically, like a case. I'm not sure I can afford a lawyer, not the kind I'd need for something this complicated. You might not need one yet. Let me make some calls, see what we can find out about the forensic handwriting analysis. My boss knows people." The school bell rang, and I watched a stream of small faces pressed against classroom windows, looking for their teacher. These kids had become my anchor over the past 4 years. They didn't care about inheritance disputes or family drama. They just wanted someone to help them learn their letters and tie their shoes and navigate the complex social dynamics of being 5 years old. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "But after school, we're going to war." Teaching that day was both a blessing and a curse. During story time, as I read The Little Red Hen to my class, I couldn't help but think about the parallels. The hen did all the work while others watched, and when it came time to enjoy the rewards, everyone suddenly wanted to participate. "That's not fair," shouted Tommy Martinez, when the hen refused to share her bread. "She should give some to her friends." "But did her friends help her plant the wheat, or harvest it, or bake the bread?" I asked. The class erupted in discussion about fairness and effort and consequences. If only real life were as simple as a children's story. Bah. After school, Carla and I met at her office. Morrison & Associates occupied the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house, all creaky hardwood floors and mismatched furniture. The atmosphere was casual but professional, and I immediately felt more comfortable than I had in Patricia Hawkins' sterile conference room. "David Morrison," said the man who emerged from the corner office. He was maybe 50, with graying hair and laugh lines that suggested he'd found ways to enjoy even the messier aspects of family law. Carla tells me you have an interesting inheritance situation. I spread the documents across his conference table and told him everything. The suspicious will changes, the forged signatures, Madison's admission of manipulation, the medical records showing Dad's anxiety in his final months. David examined each document carefully, occasionally making notes or asking for clarification. When I finished my story, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with keen eyes. "This is definitely fraud," he said finally. "The question is whether we can prove it convincingly enough to get a judge's attention. Inheritance disputes are tricky because families often have complicated dynamics that outsiders don't understand." "What do you mean?" "Madison's lawyer will argue that your father was competent when he changed his will, that family tensions had been building for years, and that his final decisions reflected his true wishes rather than manipulation. They'll paint you as a disgruntled family member who can't accept being disinherited." The words stung, because they contained just enough truth to be believable. Madison and I had been distant. There had been tensions. To an outsider, it might look like a typical family drama rather than systematic fraud. "But we have evidence," I said. "The phone records, the medical files, the handwriting inconsistencies." "We do. And it's good evidence. But we need more. We need to establish a clear timeline of Madison's actions and prove intent to defraud. Most importantly, we need to show that your father's mental state was compromised in ways that made him vulnerable to manipulation." David pulled out a legal pad and started making lists. "First, we're going to need that handwriting analysis. I know someone who does forensic document examination for the courts. Second, we need to talk to your father's doctors about his medical condition and mental state. Third, we need to find out if anyone else witnessed Madison's manipulation tactics. Like who? Neighbors who might have seen her visiting frequently, medical staff who interacted with your father, bank employees who processed the transactions. Anyone who can corroborate unusual behavior or suspicious circumstances." I felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. This wasn't just about my word against Madison's anymore. There were professional standards, legal procedures, objective evidence that could cut through the emotional manipulation Madison had perfected. "There's something else," I said, remembering. "Dad's neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She's lived next door for 15 years. She and Dad used to chat over the fence every morning. If anyone noticed changes in his routine or saw Madison visiting more often, it would be her." David nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll want to interview her informally first, see what she remembers. If she has useful information, we might need her as a witness later." "What about the money Madison already took? The $480,000 transfer? That's complicated. Even if we prove fraud, recovering assets that have been spent or hidden can be difficult. But the fact that she transferred such a large amount the day before your father's death is actually helpful evidence. It shows planning and intent." Carla had been taking notes throughout our conversation. "What's our timeline looking like?" "We'll file a formal challenge to the will within the next 2 weeks," David said. "Arizona has a 4-month statute of limitations for will contests, so we can't wait much longer. The handwriting analysis will take about 10 days. I'll start gathering medical records and bank documents immediately." "What should I do?" "Document everything. Every conversation you've had with Madison, every memory of your father's final months, every piece of evidence you can think of. And start preparing yourself for a fight. Madison isn't going to give up $500,000 without a battle." I left David's office feeling energized for the first time since this nightmare began. I had a plan, a legal team, and most importantly, a sense that justice was possible. But first, I needed to make a phone call I'd been dreading. Mrs. Chen answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Jasmine, how lovely to hear from you, dear. I was so sorry about your father. He was such a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I was wondering if I could ask you some questions about Dad's final months. I'm dealing with some estate issues, and I need to understand what was happening with him before he died." "Of course, dear. Anything I can do to help. Did you notice anything different about Dad in the weeks before he passed? Changes in his routine or his mood? Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment. Now that you mention it, yes. He seemed very anxious the last month or so. He stopped coming out to water his plants in the morning, which he'd done every day for years. And he kept asking me strange questions. What kind of questions? About you, actually. He wanted to know if I thought you were responsible with money, if you seemed happy with your life. He said Madison had told him some things that worried him, but he wasn't sure what to believe. My heart started racing. Do you remember what Madison told him? She said you'd been asking him for money, that you were struggling financially, and might not be trustworthy with a large inheritance. But Robert seemed confused about it because he said you'd never asked him for anything except advice. Did you see Madison visiting more often? Oh yes, much more often. She used to come maybe once a month, but in those last weeks, she was there 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes I'd see her car there very late at night or early in the morning. I thought it was nice that she was spending more time with her father, but Robert seemed more stressed after her visits, not comforted. Mrs. Chen's observations were painting a clear picture of Madison's campaign to isolate and manipulate Dad. But there was more. The last time I spoke to your father, Mrs. Chen continued, he seemed very upset. This was maybe a week before he died. He said Madison had shown him some bank statements or credit reports that suggested you were in serious debt. He was worried that if he left you money it would just go to creditors instead of helping you. I'm not in debt, Mrs. Chen. I've never been in serious debt. I didn't think so, dear. You've always seemed so sensible and hard-working. But Robert was very concerned. He said he was thinking about changing his will to protect you from your own financial problems. The cruelty of Madison's manipulation was breathtaking. She'd convinced our dying father that cutting me out of his will was actually an act of protection, a way to save me from myself. Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to write down what you remember? Or talk to a lawyer about what you witnessed? If it would help you get to the truth, absolutely. Your father loved you very much, Jasmine. Whatever Madison told him, he never stopped talking about how proud he was of your teaching career. After I hung up, I sat in my car and cried. Not just from sadness, but from relief. Mrs. Chen's testimony could be crucial in proving that Madison had systematically lied to Dad about my financial situation and character. But I wasn't done gathering evidence. I drove to Dad's bank, a small credit union where he'd been a member for 30 years. The manager, Frank Gutierrez, had known Dad personally and greeted me with genuine sympathy. Your father was one of our most careful customers, Frank said when I explained my situation. He never made impulsive financial decisions. So when he came in asking about large withdrawals and wire transfers, it surprised us. What kind of questions was he asking? He wanted to know about setting up joint accounts, transferring beneficiaries, things like that. But he seemed confused about the process, kept saying his daughter was helping him organize his finances, but he wasn't sure he understood all the details. Frank pulled up Dad's account history on his computer. The large cash withdrawals started about 6 weeks before he died. Always in amounts just under $10,000, which is the federal reporting threshold. Someone who knew banking regulations advised him on those transactions. Madison had her MBA in business. She would have known exactly how to structure the withdrawals to avoid triggering automatic government oversight. There's something else, Frank said, lowering his voice. The day before your father died, a woman came in with him to handle the final wire transfer. She had power of attorney paperwork and said she was helping him with his estate planning. Madison was with him? Yes. And she did most of the talking. Your father seemed tired, maybe confused. He kept asking her to explain things again, and she was getting impatient with him. It struck me as odd, because he'd always been so sharp about his finances. This was it. Evidence that Madison had physically accompanied Dad to the bank, that she'd controlled the conversation, that she'd pressured him when he seemed uncertain. Combined with Mrs. Chen's testimony and the medical records, we were building a compelling case. I drove home as the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to dealing with Madison confidence. For the first time in our relationship, I had the upper hand. I had facts, evidence, and professional support. Madison had spent decades making me feel small and insignificant. She'd convinced our father that I was irresponsible and undeserving. She'd stolen $500,000 using forged documents and emotional manipulation. But she'd underestimated me one final time. The quiet little sister she'd dismissed and undermined was about to show her what real consequences looked like. The next phase of my plan would be the most difficult yet. I was going to have to confront not just Madison, but our entire family. Because the more I investigated, the more convinced I became that Madison hadn't acted entirely alone. Yes. Someone else knew what she was doing. Someone else had helped her, or at least looked the other way while she destroyed our father's final wishes. And I was going to find out who. The forensic handwriting report arrived on a Wednesday morning, delivered by courier in a manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have. I was grading spelling tests when the doorbell rang, and I signed for the package with hands that trembled slightly. Dr. Sarah Williamson, certified forensic document examiner, had been thorough. 12 pages of technical analysis, comparison charts, and magnified signature samples. But the conclusion was written in plain English that anyone could understand. Based on microscopic analysis of ink patterns, pressure variations, and stroke characteristics, it is my professional opinion that the signature attributed to Robert Rodriguez on the will dated September 15, 2023, is a simulation or forgery. The natural hand tremor present in verified samples from the same time period is absent, and the letter formations show evidence of careful construction rather than fluid muscle memory. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the report 3 times to make sure I understood every detail. Dr. Williamson had examined 15 authentic samples of Dad's signature from the final year of his life, including checks, medical forms, and birthday cards. The forged signature was skillful, but not perfect. Under scientific scrutiny, Madison's deception was undeniable. David Morrison called that afternoon. "We have everything we need to file the challenge," he said, his voice carrying a satisfaction I hadn't heard before. "The handwriting analysis, Mrs. Chen's testimony, the bank records, your father's medical files showing cognitive stress, it's a solid case. When do we confront Madison? We don't. We let the court summons do that for us. I'm filing the paperwork tomorrow morning. She'll be served within 48 hours. But shouldn't we give her a chance to confess? To make this right without dragging it through the courts?" David was quiet for a moment. "Jasmine, people who commit this elaborate fraud don't suddenly develop consciences when they're caught. Madison has had months to do the right thing. She chose to double down on her lies instead. He was right, of course. Madison had looked me in the eye and defended her theft. She'd shown no remorse, no recognition that she'd done anything wrong. But part of me, the part that remembered building blanket forts and sharing Halloween candy, still hoped there was some way to resolve this within the family. That hope died Thursday evening when my phone rang. Mom's number. "Jasmine, honey, we need to talk." Mom's voice was strained, formal in a way that meant Madison had already gotten to her. "Can you come down this weekend? There's been a misunderstanding about your father's will." "It's not a misunderstanding, Mom. Madison forged Dad's signature and stole my inheritance." "Oh, sweetheart, that's not—" Madison explained everything. "There were some irregularities with the paperwork, but your father definitely wanted her to handle his estate. He was worried about your financial situation." The lies were spreading. Madison had clearly spent the week preparing the family, planting her version of events before I could present the truth. "Mom, I have proof. Forensic evidence that Madison forged Dad's signature. I think there's been some confusion with the legal people you've been talking to. Why don't we all sit down together and work this out? As a family." The word family had become weaponized. Every time someone said it in this context, they meant shut up and let Madison get away with it. "Fine," I said. "This weekend, but I'm bringing my lawyer." "Oh, honey, I don't think that's necessary. We can handle this ourselves." "No, Mom, we can't. Not anymore." I called David immediately. "Change of plans. My family wants a meeting this weekend. I think Madison is trying to control the narrative before the court summons arrives. Are you sure you want to do this?" Once we're in litigation, these informal family conferences can become complications. I need to see their faces when they learn the truth. I need to know who else was involved. David agreed to accompany me to Phoenix, but only as an observer. The formal legal challenge would proceed regardless of what happened at the family meeting. Friday afternoon, I drove south with a folder full of evidence and a recording app ready on my phone. Arizona is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations without telling the other participants. Given Madison's talent for rewriting history, I wanted an objective record of whatever was about to happen. Mom and Mom's sister, Aunt Rosa, were waiting at Mom's house when I arrived. The absence of other family members told me this intervention had been carefully orchestrated. Madison's car wasn't in the driveway yet. "Jasmine, you look tired," Mom said, hugging me with the kind of concerned affection that felt like a warm-up for an emotional manipulation. "This whole legal business must be so stressful." "Not as stressful as having my inheritance stolen," I replied. Aunt Rosa, who had always favored Madison, looked at me with disapproval. "Your sister is going through a difficult divorce, Misa. Maybe you could show a little compassion." Compassion for what? For committing felony fraud? For making mistakes when she was scared and desperate? Madison never meant to hurt you. The casual dismissal of Madison's crimes as mistakes was breathtaking. She'd systematically manipulated our dying father, forged legal documents, and stolen $500,000. But because she was pretty and charming and going through a divorce, it was just a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with family love. Madison arrived precisely at 6, walking through the front door like she owned the place. Which, I realized with a bitter laugh, she probably would someday. She'd likely inherit Mom's house too, along with everything else she'd managed to claim. She'd dressed carefully for this confrontation. A simple black dress that conveyed both grief and responsibility. Minimal makeup that suggested she was too overwhelmed by life's burdens to worry about vanity. Even her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, rather than her usual styled perfection. "Jasmine," she said softly, reaching out as if to hug me. "I'm so glad you came. I've been hoping we could work this out." I stepped back from her embrace. "The only thing to work out is when you're going to return the money you stole." Madison's face crumpled with practiced sorrow. "Is that really what you think happened? That I stole from our father?" "I don't think so. I know it. I have proof." I pulled the forensic handwriting report from my folder and placed it on Mom's coffee table. Dr. Sarah Williamson is a certified document examiner. She's testified in court dozens of times. According to her analysis, you forged Dad's signature on the will. Madison glanced at the report but didn't pick it up. "I don't understand all this technical language. But I know Dad changed his will because he was worried about you. He told me so himself." "When? When did he tell you that?" "The last time I visited him. He said you'd been calling him, asking for money, and he was concerned about your financial judgment." "I never asked Dad for money. Not once in my adult life." "Maybe not directly, but you complained about your apartment, your car, your student loans. Dad felt guilty that he couldn't help you more, and he started to worry that you saw him as a bank account instead of a father." The accusation was so twisted, so precisely calibrated to hurt, that I almost gasped. Madison was describing her own relationship with Dad and projecting it onto me. "Mrs. Chen saw you visiting Dad 2 or 3 times a week before he died," I said. "She heard you telling him lies about my finances. She witnessed you manipulating him." "Mrs. Chen is 90 years old and has dementia," Madison said smoothly. "She thinks I'm you half the time. Ask anyone in the neighborhood. Her memory isn't reliable." I hadn't known about Mrs. Chen's memory issues. Madison's quick response suggested she'd already anticipated this line of attack and prepared her defense. "What about the bank records? You were with Dad when he made the wire transfer. The bank manager said you did most of the talking." "I was helping him handle his finances because his arthritis made it hard for him to write. He asked me to come with him because he trusted me to make sure everything was done correctly." Every piece of evidence I presented, Madison had an explanation for. Not necessarily a good explanation, but plausible enough to create doubt in the minds of people who wanted to believe her. Mom and Aunt Rosa were nodding along with Madison's version of events. They'd already decided which daughter to believe, and it wasn't the one with the forensic evidence. "Show them the medical records," I said, pulling out more documents. Dad was taking anti-anxiety medication in his final weeks. His doctor noted family stress and increased agitation. That's not normal for someone making calm, rational decisions about his will. Madison's composure cracked slightly. Dad was grieving. We all were. He'd lost several friends that year, and he was facing his own mortality. Of course he was anxious. "He was anxious because you were pressuring him," I said. "You were telling him lies about me, manipulating him when he was vulnerable, making him doubt his own judgment." "I was protecting him," Madison snapped, her mask slipping for just a moment. "From you. From your constant neediness and your expectation that everyone else should solve your problems." There it was. The real Madison, the one who believed her own lies so completely that she'd convinced herself she was the victim. "What problems, Madison?" "I have a stable job, a clean credit record, no debt except my student loans. What exactly was I expecting Dad to solve?" "Your mediocrity," Madison said coldly. "Your complete inability to build anything meaningful with your life. Dad worked himself to death so his daughters could have opportunities, and you chose to waste yours playing with children for pocket change." The room went silent. Even Mom looked shocked by the venom in Madison's voice. "There it is," I said quietly. "The real reason you stole my inheritance. Not because Dad was worried about my finances. Because you think I don't deserve it." Madison realized she'd revealed too much. She tried to backtrack, to return to her performance of concern and sisterly love. "That's not what I meant," she said. "I just think Dad wanted his money to go where it could do the most good. My children's education, securing their future." "Your children?" I interrupted. "Madison, you don't have children. You've been married to Marcus for 8 years and never had kids." Another mask slipped. Madison had been improvising, creating fictional grandchildren to justify her theft. "We're planning to start a family," she said weakly. "With what marriage? You told me Marcus left you. Remember, when you need $3,000 for lawyer fees?" Mom was staring at Madison with dawning confusion. "Madison, what is Jasmine talking about? I thought you and Marcus were doing well." Madison's face flushed red. She'd been caught in multiple lies, and her carefully constructed narrative was falling apart. "My marriage is complicated," she said. "Marcus and I are working through some issues." I pulled out my phone and showed Mom Madison's Instagram account from the past month. Photos of expensive dinners, spa days, shopping trips, all time-stamped after Dad's death. "This is how Madison has been spending Dad's money," I said. "While I've been grieving and struggling to pay my bills, she's been living like a lottery winner." Mom scrolled through the photos, her expression shifting from confusion to dismay. "Madison, where did you get the money for all this?" "Those photos are old," Madison lied desperately. "I scheduled them to post automatically." But the timestamps were clearly visible, and Mom knew enough about social media to recognize fresh content. "The court summons will be served Monday," I said, standing up. "Madison is going to be charged with forgery, fraud, and elder abuse. The district attorney is already reviewing the case." Madison went pale. "You called the police?" "I filed a complaint, yes. What you did isn't just a family disagreement, Madison. It's a felony." "You can't be serious," Aunt Rosa said. "You're going to send your own sister to jail over money?" "I'm going to hold my sister accountable for stealing from our dead father," I corrected. "The jail part is up to the judge." Madison suddenly stood up, her composure completely shattered. "You self-righteous bitch," she snarled. "You act like you're so pure, so innocent, but you're just jealous. You've always been jealous that I'm smarter, prettier, more successful. This isn't about Dad or his money. This is about you finally having a chance to tear me down." The performance was over. The mask was off. This was Madison without filters, without charm, without the social skills that had protected her for years. "You're right," I said calmly. "I am jealous." I'm jealous that you can sleep at night after what you've done. I'm jealous that you can look in the mirror without seeing a thief. I'm jealous that you can steal $500,000 from your own father and still think you're the victim. I gathered my documents and headed for the door. Mom, I love you. But if you choose to protect Madison after everything I've shown you today, I won't be coming around anymore. I can't watch you enable someone who would rob her own family. As I reached the front door, Madison called after me. Jasmine, wait. Maybe we can work something out, a payment plan or something. I turned back to look at her. She was crying now, but the tears looked calculated, strategic. The time for working things out was 3 months ago, when you could have told the truth. Or last week, when you could have confessed. Or even today, when you could have shown some remorse. But you didn't. You doubled down on your lies and tried to gaslight me into believing I was crazy. I'm your sister, she whispered. No, I said. You're a criminal who happens to share my DNA. There's a difference. I walked out of Mom's house knowing I might never be welcome there again. But for the first time in months, I felt free. The confrontation had stripped away all pretense, all family mythology, all the comfortable lies we'd told ourselves about who we were. Madison was exactly who I'd suspected she was, a narcissistic manipulator who would steal from anyone, even her own dying father, if it served her purposes. And I was exactly who I'd hoped I could become, someone strong enough to stand up for the truth, even when it cost me everything else. The legal battle was just beginning, but the real war, the one for my own self-respect and integrity, was already won. The court summons was served at 8:42 a.m. on Monday morning. I knew because Madison called me exactly 17 minutes later, her voice shaking with a rage I'd never heard before. You actually did it, she said without preamble. You actually called the police on your own sister. I was in my classroom, preparing for another day of teaching kindergartners about letters and numbers and basic human decency. The irony wasn't lost on me. I filed a complaint with the district attorney's office, I corrected. The police served the summons because what you did is a crime. This is insane, Jasmine. You're destroying our family over money. No, Madison. You destroyed our family when you forged Dad's signature. I'm just refusing to help you cover it up. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Madison's voice returned, different now, calculating. You have no idea what you've started, she said. I have lawyers too. Good ones. And when they're done with you, you'll wish you'd just walked away. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you. By the time this is over, everyone will know exactly what kind of person you really are. She hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in the empty classroom. Madison's threat felt real in a way that chilled me. She'd spent years building a network of influential friends through her marriage and social connections. I was a kindergarten teacher from Denver. In a battle of public perception, she had advantages I couldn't match. But I also had something she didn't: the truth. David Morrison called an hour later with updates that made Madison's threats seem less intimidating. The district attorney's office is very interested in this case, he said. Financial elder abuse is a priority for them, especially when it involves forged documents and large sums of money. They're assigning Detective Lisa Torres to investigate. What does that mean for the will challenge? It means we have 2 parallel tracks now. The civil case to overturn the will and recover your inheritance, and the criminal case that could send Madison to prison. They'll support each other. That afternoon, Detective Torres called to schedule an interview. She was a 15-year veteran of white-collar crime investigations, and her voice carried the kind of professional authority that made me feel like Madison had finally met someone she couldn't charm or manipulate. But Madison wasn't done fighting. By Wednesday, the first salvo in her public relations campaign appeared on social media. Carla showed me the Facebook post during lunch, her expression grim. Madison had written a long, emotional statement about family betrayal and false accusations. According to her version of events, I was a troubled sister who had become consumed with jealousy and greed after being excluded from Dad's final will. My father made his final decisions with a clear mind and loving heart, Madison had written. He wanted to protect Jasmine from her own financial struggles, but she's chosen to respond with lies and legal attacks. I'm heartbroken that our family drama has become so public, but I will defend my father's memory and his final wishes. The post had been shared dozens of times already, with comments from Madison's friends expressing sympathy and outrage on her behalf. None of them knew the truth, of course. They only saw Madison's carefully crafted narrative of victimhood. "She's good," Carla said grimly. "She's getting ahead of the story, making herself look like the victim before the criminal charges become public." But Madison's social media strategy backfired in ways she hadn't anticipated. Within hours, people who actually knew our family began responding with their own comments and messages. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter posted a detailed response defending me and describing Madison's suspicious behavior in Dad's final weeks. Several of Dad's former coworkers shared their own memories of him talking proudly about my teaching career and expressing confidence in my financial responsibility. Most damaging was a comment from Frank Gutierrez at the credit union. As Robert Rodriguez's longtime banker, I can confirm that he always spoke highly of both his daughters, but expressed concern in his final weeks about pressure from family members regarding his financial decisions. The transactions in question were highly unusual for someone of Mr. Rodriguez's careful habits. Madison deleted Frank's comment within minutes, but screenshots had already been captured and shared. Her attempt to control the narrative was crumbling. The real escalation came Thursday evening when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find a woman in an expensive suit holding a tablet and a small recording device. "Jasmine Rodriguez? I'm Angela Shaw from Shaw Investigations. I've been hired to conduct an independent inquiry into allegations you've made against your sister." I stared at her, confused. "I'm sorry, who hired you?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss my client, but I'd like to ask you some questions about your relationship with your father and your financial situation. This interview could help clear up misunderstandings before this matter goes any further." The whole situation felt wrong. Why would anyone hire a private investigator to question me? Unless Madison hired you, I said. Angela Shaw's expression didn't change, but she didn't deny it either. "I'm simply trying to gather facts. Were you aware that your father expressed concerns about your spending habits to several people in his final months?" "What people?" "I've interviewed neighbors, medical staff, and family friends who confirm that Robert Rodriguez was worried about your financial judgment. There's a pattern of concerning behavior that supports the will changes you're disputing." This was Madison's next move. She was building a counter-narrative supported by paid investigators and carefully selected witnesses. She was trying to prove that Dad really had been worried about me, that his will changes were legitimate. "I'm not answering any questions without my lawyer present," I said, starting to close the door. "Ms. Rodriguez, I should mention that we've also obtained records showing significant credit card debt and several late payment notices on your student loans. Your father may have been more aware of your financial struggles than you realized." I slammed the door shut, my heart racing. How had Madison gotten access to my financial records? And how much of what Angela Shaw claimed was true versus manufactured evidence? I called David immediately. "Madison hired a private investigator. She's trying to build a case that Dad really was worried about my finances. That's not uncommon in inheritance disputes. Rich defendants often try to muddy the waters with counter-investigations." "Did you say anything to this investigator?" "No, I told her I wouldn't talk without you present." "Good. Don't engage with anyone Madison sends. And we need to check your credit reports immediately. If someone has been accessing your financial information illegally, that's another crime we can add to the pile." The credit report results arrived by email an hour later, and they were worse than I'd feared. Someone had been making inquiries about my financial history for the past 2 months, using information that only a family member would have. Madison had been planning this defense strategy long before I'd discovered the forged will. But there was more. The report showed several unfamiliar credit card applications in my name, all denied due to identity verification issues. Someone had been trying to open accounts using my social security number and personal information. "Madison's been building a case that you're financially irresponsible," David explained when I called him with the findings. "She's probably planning to argue that your father knew about these credit applications and was worried you were developing gambling or spending problems." "But I never applied for these cards. This is more identity theft. I know. And that's actually good news for us. It shows a pattern of Madison using your identity for fraudulent purposes. The detective will want to see these records. Detective Torres was very interested indeed. When I met her Friday morning at the district attorney's office, she spread my credit reports across the conference table like pieces of a puzzle. "This is sophisticated," she said, studying the timeline of unauthorized inquiries. "Your sister has been planning this fraud for months, maybe longer. She was building evidence to support her claim that your father was legitimately concerned about your finances. Can you prove she was the one making these inquiries? We're working on it. Several of the credit applications were submitted online using IP addresses we're tracing. If they lead back to Madison's home or office computers, we'll have her." Detective Torres leaned back in her chair and studied me with sharp eyes. "Ms. Rodriguez, I have to ask, is there any truth to these claims about financial problems? Any reason your father might have been legitimately worried? I live paycheck to paycheck like most teachers, but I've never missed a payment or asked anyone for money. My student loans are current. I don't have credit card debt because I can't afford to carry debt. What about the $3,000 you gave Madison a few months ago? I'd forgotten that detail and everything else that had happened. She said Marcus had left her and she needed money for divorce lawyers. But I found out later she'd used it for a spa weekend. So you did have $3,000 available for emergency lending?" The question felt like a trap. "I had an emergency fund, yes. About $4,000 total. It took me 3 years to save it." Detective Torres made a note. "Madison's investigators are going to use that against you. They'll say your father knew you had money available but were claiming to be broke." "I never claimed to be broke, I just didn't ask him for help because I didn't need it." "I believe you, but a good defense attorney will twist that story. We need to be prepared for Madison to fight dirty." She was right. Over the weekend, the dirty fighting escalated dramatically. Saturday morning, I received a certified letter from Blackstone and Associates, a law firm in Phoenix. Madison had hired criminal defense attorneys, expensive ones who specialized in white-collar crime. The letter demanded that I cease all harassment and defamation of their client, and warned that they were prepared to file countersuits for malicious prosecution and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Ms. Rodriguez's baseless accusations have caused our client severe emotional trauma and reputational damage, the letter read. We demand immediate withdrawal of all legal actions and a public apology, or we will pursue all available remedies including damages for lost income and emotional suffering. I was staring at the letter when my phone rang, my mother's number. "Jasmine, honey, we need to talk." Mom's voice was strained, tired. "Madison's lawyers called me. They're saying you could go to jail for filing false police reports." "Mom, I didn't file false reports. I have evidence that Madison committed fraud. They said the evidence is fake, that you paid someone to forge documents to frame Madison because you're angry about the will." The audacity was breathtaking. Madison was accusing me of the exact crime she'd committed, using the same evidence I'd gathered against her. "Did they show you proof of these claims?" "They sent me some papers. Financial records showing you've been struggling with money. Applications for credit cards and loans. They said Dad found out about all this, and that's why he changed his will." Madison's lawyers were showing Mom the fake credit applications, the ones Madison had created using my identity. They were using Madison's own crimes as evidence that I was financially irresponsible. "Mom, those credit applications are fraudulent. Madison created them using my personal information to make it look like I was in financial trouble." "Oh, sweetheart, I don't understand all this legal stuff." But Madison's lawyers seem very sure about their facts. And they said if you drop the charges, she won't press charges against you for filing false reports. It was a trap. Madison was offering me a way out that would leave her free and clear while making me look like a liar who'd fabricated evidence. If I accepted, she'd keep Dad's money and I'd be branded as someone who'd falsely accused her own sister of crimes. "I'm not dropping anything, Mom. Madison is a criminal, and she's going to face the consequences." "Jasmine, please. Think about what this is doing to our family. Your cousin Elena is getting married next month, and all anyone can talk about is this lawsuit. Can't you just let it go? For the sake of family peace?" There it was again. The expectation that I should sacrifice myself to maintain everyone else's comfort. That I should let Madison steal $500,000 because holding her accountable was inconvenient for family gatherings. No, Mom, I can't let it go. And if the family chooses Madison over the truth, that's their choice. But I won't be part of covering up her crimes anymore. When I hung up, I felt hollow. Madison's legal strategy was working exactly as planned. She was making me the problem, turning my pursuit of justice into a threat to family stability. The people who should have been supporting me were being manipulated into seeing me as the aggressor. But Monday brought news that changed everything. Key hack, Detective Torres called with barely contained excitement in her voice. We traced the IP addresses from those fake credit applications. They came from computers at Marcus Sullivan's construction company offices. And we found something even better. What? Security camera footage from the credit union. Madison's visit with your father on the day of the wire transfer was recorded. We can see her coaching him on what to say, correcting him when he hesitated, and taking the pen from his hand to sign documents herself. The evidence was overwhelming now. Video proof of Madison manipulating Dad. Digital evidence of her creating fake financial records. Forensic proof that she'd forged his signature. There's more, Detective Torres continued. We've identified 3 other elderly clients at that same credit union who've reported suspicious will changes in the past 2 years. Madison may have been running this scam on other families. Madison wasn't just his sister who'd made one terrible mistake. She was a serial predator who targeted vulnerable elderly people, including her own father. We're expanding the investigation, Detective Torres said, and the district attorney is upgrading the charges. Madison is looking at multiple felony counts and potentially decades in prison. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine hope. Madison's elaborate legal defense was about to crumble under the weight of evidence. Her expensive lawyers couldn't argue with video footage and digital forensics. The quiet kindergarten teacher she'd underestimated for years was about to bring down her entire criminal enterprise. Justice was finally coming for Madison Rodriguez Sullivan. And this time, no amount of charm or manipulation was going to save her. The call came at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Detective Torres had uncovered the video evidence. I was making coffee when David Morrison's number flashed on my screen, his voice carrying an energy I hadn't heard since this whole nightmare began. Madison's lawyers want to meet, he said without preamble. They're requesting a plea conference. Her legal team knows they can't win this case. I set down my coffee mug, my hands suddenly steady for the first time in months. What kind of plea? They're prepared to discuss full restitution, admission of guilt, and a negotiated sentence that avoids trial. The video evidence was devastating, but what really broke them was the discovery of the other victims. Detective Torres had identified 5 additional elderly clients who'd been targeted by Madison's scheme. All of them had experienced sudden will changes, suspicious financial transactions, and family members who'd been systematically discredited through fabricated evidence. The pattern was so clear, so methodical, that even Madison's expensive lawyers couldn't construct a viable defense. How many years is she looking at? With 5 counts of elder fraud, multiple forgery charges, and the federal wire fraud counts, she could face 20 to 30 years. Her lawyers know that even with a plea deal, she's going to prison. I should have felt triumphant. After months of gaslighting, manipulation, and legal intimidation, Madison was finally facing consequences that matched her crimes. But instead, I felt empty, exhausted, ready for this chapter of my life to close permanently. When do we meet with them? Friday afternoon in Phoenix. And Jasmine? Come prepared for Madison to make one final attempt at manipulation. People like her don't accept defeat gracefully. David was right. When we arrived at the conference room of Blackstone and Associates that Friday, Madison was already seated at the polished mahogany table. She'd chosen her appearance carefully again, a conservative navy suit, minimal makeup, and an expression of resigned sadness that would have been convincing if I hadn't seen her true face so many times before. Her lead attorney, Richard Blackstone, was a silver-haired man in his 60s who radiated the kind of expensive confidence that comes from decades of defending wealthy criminals. He stood when we entered, offering handshakes and pleasantries as if we were all colleagues rather than adversaries. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, studying me with calculating eyes, "I appreciate you agreeing to this meeting. I think we can find a resolution that serves everyone's interests." Madison looked up at me with tears already forming in her perfectly mascaraed eyes. "Jasmine, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for any of this to happen." The performance was flawless, but I'd learned to see through Madison's emotional manipulations. This wasn't genuine remorse. It was a strategic display designed to elicit sympathy and reduce her sentence. "My client is prepared to make a full confession," Blackstone continued, "and to provide complete restitution for all financial damages. In exchange, we're hoping the prosecutor will consider a reduced sentence that reflects Madison's cooperation and genuine remorse." David opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Before we discuss any deals, let's review exactly what Madison is confessing to." The list of crimes was staggering. Forgery of legal documents, wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. Fraud against multiple victims totaling over $2 million across 3 years. Computer crimes related to the fake credit applications. Even mail fraud for intercepting bank statements. "Madison has been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise," David said calmly. "This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of desperation. This was a calculated, ongoing scheme to defraud elderly people, including her own father." Blackstone's confidence wavered slightly. "My client was going through a difficult divorce. Her judgment was impaired by emotional distress and financial pressure." "Her judgment was impaired by greed," I said, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down. "She stole $500,000 from our dying father while I was grieving. She created fake evidence to make me look financially irresponsible. She hired investigators to harass me and tried to destroy my reputation. This wasn't a mistake, Mr. Blackstone. This was malicious, premeditated fraud." Madison's tears increased on cue. "Jasmine, please, I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible choices. But I'm still your sister. Doesn't that mean anything?" The question hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I saw flashes of the girl who'd shared a bedroom with me for 15 years. The teenager who'd helped me with my homework when I was struggling. The young woman who'd hugged me when I graduated college. But then I remembered Dad's handwritten notes about his concerns, Mrs. Chen's observations about his increased anxiety. The bank manager's description of Madison pressuring a confused elderly man into transactions he didn't understand. "You stopped being my sister the moment you decided to steal from our father," I said quietly. "Family doesn't manipulate each other. Family doesn't forge signatures or create fake evidence, or try to gaslight each other into accepting abuse." Madison's expression shifted subtly, the mask of remorse slipping just enough to reveal the calculation underneath. She was assessing whether the sister card was working, whether she could still manipulate me into advocating for leniency. "The prosecution is prepared to recommend 12 years with possibility of parole in 8, said Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who joined us via video conference. "In exchange for full confession, complete restitution to all victims, and cooperation in identifying any additional victims or accomplices." 12 years? Madison gasped, her tears suddenly very real. "I have my whole life ahead of me. I could be 44 when I get out." "You should have thought about that before you decided to become a career criminal," Jennifer Walsh replied without sympathy. "The average sentence for this many fraud charges would be 25 years. 12 is generous considering the scope of your crimes." Blackstone huddled with Madison and her other attorneys, their voices too low to hear. I watched Madison's face as they explained her options, saw the moment when she realized that her charm and manipulation tactics were powerless against video evidence and forensic proof. When they returned to the table, Blackstone's demeanor had changed completely. "My client accepts the terms," he said formally. "Full confession, complete restitution, 8 to 12 years depending on parole board evaluation." "There's one more condition," I said, surprising everyone, including David. "Madison has to publicly admit what she did. A full confession posted on her social media accounts, explaining exactly how she defrauded our father and the other victims. No spin, no excuses, just the truth. Madison's face went white. "I can't do that. It would ruin my reputation permanently." "Your reputation should be ruined," I said. "You're a criminal who stole from dying elderly people. The public has a right to know what you really are." "That's not legally necessary," Blackstone protested. "Then there's no deal," I said, standing up. "Madison can go to trial and face 30 years instead of 12. But I'm not letting her slink away quietly while her victims wonder if they were really defrauded or just confused." David looked at me with something like pride. "My client has made her position clear: public confession or no deal." The room was silent for several minutes. Madison stared at the table, probably calculating whether 8 years in prison was worth preserving her social media image. Finally, she looked up with the kind of hatred I'd never seen directed at me before. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "I'll post your precious confession. But don't expect me to beg for your forgiveness ever again." "I stopped expecting anything from you a long time ago," I replied. The legal paperwork took another 3 hours to complete. Madison would plead guilty the following Monday. Restitution would begin immediately. She'd have to liquidate her assets, including the house Dad had unwittingly bought her, to repay the stolen funds. Her confession would be posted within 48 hours. As we prepared to leave, Madison made one final attempt at manipulation. "Jasmine," she called as I reached the door. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed our family to get your money back." I turned to look at her one last time. "Madison, I didn't destroy our family. I just refused to pretend we still had one after you stole from our father's deathbed." That weekend, Madison's confession appeared on her Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn accounts. It was clinical and precise, acknowledging each crime without emotional embellishment. "I have pled guilty to multiple charges of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. I systematically defrauded several elderly victims, including my own father, Robert Rodriguez, by forging legal documents and manipulating them during vulnerable periods of their lives. I stole approximately $2.1 million over 3 years. I created false evidence to discredit family members who questioned my actions. I am guilty of these crimes and will be sentenced to 8 to 12 years in federal prison. I offer this confession as part of my plea agreement and as an acknowledgement of the harm I have caused to my victims and their families." The response was immediate and brutal. Hundreds of comments from former friends, business associates, and social connections expressing shock, disgust, and betrayal. Several people shared stories about Madison's past behavior that suddenly made sense in the context of her criminal activities. Marcus Sullivan, her estranged husband, posted his own statement, revealing that their marriage had ended because he'd discovered Madison stealing from his business accounts. He'd filed for divorce and contacted the FBI, but Madison had convinced him to keep quiet to avoid scandal. The woman I'd grown up believing was charming and successful was revealed to be a serial manipulator who'd been conning people for years. Monday morning, I sat in the courtroom as Madison formally entered her guilty plea. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her designer clothes and perfect makeup. When the judge asked if she understood the charges against her, her voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." "And how do you plead to count 1, felony fraud in the first degree?" "Guilty." The word echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. After months of lies, manipulation, and legal maneuvering, Madison had finally admitted the truth. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Madison would remain free on bail until then, but her passport had been surrendered, and her assets frozen pending restitution calculations. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: genuine peace. The weight of uncertainty, of fighting against gaslighting and manipulation, of wondering if I was crazy or if my family really was as toxic as it seemed, had finally lifted. David walked beside me in comfortable silence until we reached the parking garage. "How are you feeling?" "Free," I said, and realized I meant it completely. For the first time in my adult life, I feel free. 3 months later, I received a cashier's check for $547,000, my original inheritance plus interest and legal fees. Madison had been forced to sell the house, Dad had unknowingly bought her, liquidate her investment accounts, and even surrender her jewelry collection to meet the restitution requirements. I used part of the money to pay off my student loans and buy a reliable car, but most of it went into investments and a savings account that would give me financial security for the first time in my life. More importantly, I used some of the funds to establish the Robert Rodriguez Education Fund, a scholarship program for students from working-class families who wanted to become teachers. Dad would have loved knowing that his life savings were helping young people pursue careers in education. Madison was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. She'll be eligible for parole in 8 years if she demonstrates good behavior and genuine rehabilitation. I don't expect to hear from her again. The rest of my family made their choices. Mom continued to believe that I'd been too harsh, that family should forgive family regardless of crimes committed. Aunt Rosa stopped speaking to me entirely. Several cousins sided with Madison, convinced that I'd somehow orchestrated her downfall out of jealousy. But others reached out with support and their own stories of Madison's manipulative behavior over the years. Uncle Miguel admitted that Madison had borrowed money from him repeatedly and never repaid it. Cousin Elena revealed that Madison had tried to steal her identity for a credit card application years earlier. The truth about Madison's character had been hidden in plain sight for decades. I was just the first person with enough evidence and determination to expose it publicly. 6 months after Madison's sentencing, I moved to a larger apartment with a home office where I could work on educational consulting projects. I started dating again, something I'd avoided during the chaos of the legal proceedings. I rekindled friendships I'd neglected while dealing with family drama. Most importantly, I learned to trust my own perceptions and judgments. Years of gaslighting had made me doubt my ability to assess situations accurately, but the legal vindication proved that my instincts about Madison had been correct all along. I still teach kindergarten because I love it, but now I do it from a position of financial security rather than desperation. My students still don't know about the inheritance battle, or the criminal sister or the family that imploded over money and truth. To them, I'm just Miss Rodriguez, who helps them learn to read and tie their shoes and navigate the complex dynamics of being human. And that's exactly who I want to be. On quiet Sunday mornings, I sometimes think about Dad. Not about the money he left behind or the will Madison forged, but about the conversations we had during his final months. He'd been proud of my teaching career, supportive of my independence, confident in my character. Madison had tried to poison his mind against me, but she'd never completely succeeded. In his heart, Dad had known who his daughters really were. That's why he'd originally planned to split his estate equally, and why Madison had to forge documents to change his wishes. The money was nice, but the real inheritance Dad left me was the knowledge that I was worthy of love and respect. Madison had spent years trying to convince me otherwise, but Dad's faith in me had been unshakable. I survived Madison's manipulation. I exposed her crimes. I chose truth over family loyalty and justice over convenience. Most importantly, I learned that I was stronger than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. The quiet little sister who'd been dismissed and underestimated had found her voice, and when I finally spoke up, the whole house of lies came tumbling down. I am Jasmine Rodriguez. I am a teacher, a truth teller, and a survivor. And I walk through the world now with my head high, carrying my father's legacy and my own hard-won wisdom. Madison took a lot from me over the years, but in the end, she gave me something invaluable: the knowledge that I could fight for myself and win. For that lesson, I suppose I should thank her. But I think I'll save my gratitude for the people who actually deserve it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.